Hello and welcome. It's another solo podcast and a Q&A answering the questions from Instagram. We've got 29 to get through in total. So this will be a short, sharp episode with a few of the deeper thoughts and feelings of Colin Campbell and hopefully of interest or of value. And as I said in the intro, a nice way to break up the episodes with guests, of which I've got a fantastic backlog now, and so much so we may even see 2 episodes a week moving forward. But I won't promise anything until I can deliver. Without any further ado, dive into the questions. No nonsense here. Question 1. If you had the power to change one thing about the world, what would it be? For me, there's the opportunity here to go really deep here, like very political, or look at a worldwide issue. But I've decided to think about it from a personal perspective. And I think if I had the power to change one thing on a personal level, it would be for people to be more honest with themselves. I think a lot of our pain and struggle comes from our inability to address the tales or the lies that we sometimes tell ourselves. And that sounds really difficult. But if we were more honest about who we are, what we want, and then reflected that in our actions, then I think we'd be a lot happier. We'd be a lot healthier. We'd be more fulfilled and have greater purpose in terms of our actions. And for me, that sounds like a happier world. I don't want to address things from a wider perspective, but I think personally, I think if we were more honest, that would be excellent. Question 2, your gym pet hates. I found it hard to whittle this down, so I'm feeling a bit savage. We're going to go for 3 gym pet hates. The first of them is, imagine you're in a busy gym, hopefully not during the COVID period, and you've got 2 people who are training together. They're both doing incline bench press, for example. This is one I commonly see. Now, in a busy gym, etiquette should dictate that you work in together. However, you often see people who actually know each other and sometimes even training together as partners, using 2 separate benches, 2 sets of dumbbells, and using separate equipment, taking up kind of valuable room and space that is just not necessary. And I also think on a kind of further forward level, if you want to use the barbell bench press and there's somebody on it that you sort of know, we should be comfortable enough, unless it means unracking tons of plates and the weights you're using are like tens of 30s of 40s of kilos apart, then we should be more amenable to working in. So a gym pet hate is people not working in with each other, or particularly training partners using different bits of kit at the same time. Question 3, the second gym pet hate, holding on to the handles on an incline treadmill. So if you're walking on an incline on a treadmill, the calorie count and the benefit of the exercise comes from the stabilization needed to walk on the incline without support from the handles. And if you are taking the calorie count on these machines seriously, then you need to be doing it as unassisted as possible. And if you're walking up a hill in everyday life, you would not by any means be holding on for dear life. So the calorie count in these machines is calculated without thinking it's holding on. So there's no point in doing that. Equally, if you find it hard to walk on that, then reduce the incline and get more used to it. And we progressively overload to get there. Last one that kind of links into that calorie burn piece is people obsessing over the calories burnt on a fitness watch or a Fitbit or a tracker, particularly when the goal is muscle gain or muscle stimulus or toning, whatever term you want to use. Nobody should really care too much that their leg session built or burnt 600 calories. We should be focused far more on, did the movements that I chose within this program stimulate the muscles that I need to? Did I progressively overload the movements? Did I use correct range of motion and technique and form? Rather than, oh, that was a really sweaty leg session, I burnt 600 calories. That might be good if you're in a fat loss focus phase. And equally, these watches are incredibly inaccurate. And I actually don't wear one. No slight against anyone that does, but don't hang your hat on what was accomplished within the session just based on calories. Focus more on getting stronger and overloading your desired rep range, stimulating the muscles properly, and using correct form. Really common question number 3, who's your dream podcast guest? And we'll touch a little bit more on this later on with the other questions, but I think James Clear remains the main guest I would love to have on, because his book, Atomic Habits, has had such a profound effect on how I live my life, how many of my friends live their life, how many of the listeners live their life. So I think it'd be fantastic to have James on and really delve into it. He's been on lots of podcasts. He's a very busy guy. I think we'll have to continue growing the podcast to have the leverage to get somebody like James Clear on. And alongside that, I'm really pleased with where we're at just now. I said previously that I wanted Joe Delaney and Andrew Craig alongside. James is one of my main priorities is coming on as a guest, and we've achieved that already in the first 60 odd episodes to have those two on. So to have two of my top three kind of most desired guests on the podcast already feels amazing. So let's keep shooting for James Clear. Right, this question, I'm going to sip the monster before I answer this because it's quite heavy and it's a really good one. Metal straw, of course. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll have seen that. Question 4. Call, you're 17. What's the plan? I'm going to answer this from two perspectives. The first of all, I'm going to look at what the actual plan was and what came to transpire. And then the second area, I'm going to look at what I might have done differently on reflection. At the age of 17, I would have been in 6th year at school at Bearsden Academy and due to go and study a politics degree at Glasgow University. The reason for that degree was when I was at school towards the latter end, I wanted to be a sports journalist and I was writing a lot of match reports. I was writing a lot of newsletters, particularly around rugby and the rugby club that I played for at the time and the men's team that played there. And the plan was I would go to Glasgow Uni, get a politics degree, which was advised rather than getting a journalism degree because we were cranking out journalists at that time. Less and less people were reading newspapers. And you might see why I didn't end up as a journalist based on how things are in the online space. And that was very much the plan. Get a good quality degree, continue with writing sports articles, do some blogging, write some newsletters. And the plan was to progress in that space and build up my portfolio. I'd been published in the Herald at the age of 16 or 17 and was writing reports every weekend in the local newspaper as well as on the website and doing some stuff for the Scottish Rugby Union as well, which is amazing. But I never really progressed that. And it came to a stage where I guess that was the plan and that was where I was heading at that point. I want to say before I tell you about what I would maybe do in reflection is that everything you do shapes where you end up. So any experience that I had was valuable. I am thankful for the politics degree. I am thankful for getting to speak to and interview people as a journalist at the age of just 17, like some really big figures within the rugby world in Scotland. And that was really valuable to me. And probably some of that is fed over to my skill set nowadays, both in work, but also on the podcast. However, if I had my time again, I think I could have done things better to end up further ahead than I am now on the path that I'm on. And I think I would definitely still do the politics degree. However, alongside it as a joint honours, I would do some sort of business focused around economics or finance or not quite accounting, but something in that space. So I was a bit more business minded and it could set me up for greater success in this space. I would definitely start my side hustles earlier. I was clearly enjoyed writing and creating content, but it took me until 2017, which was when I was 20. Oh, what older than that? Yeah, I think I'd have been 24, 25 in 2017. And it took me until then to be posting regularly online. That's not acceptable. Like if I genuinely at the age of 17, which would have been 2009, was focused, I would have been producing content from a much younger age, and that would have been valuable. However, the biggest piece that I would give to biggest plan I would have for 17-year-old Colin would be to stop caring about what other people around you think sooner, because people will always judge you, especially when you do things that they deem unusual. So that might be creating more content online. It might be embracing my interest in fitness more. So it might be not drinking as often on nights out when I didn't really fancy like doing it. And that would be a big focus for 17-year-old Colin, if I'm honest. Question 5, 3 things you like about the fitness industry. Number 1's got to be the people that I've met within it. There's a mixed bag of people within the fitness industry, and I've been extremely selective, and I've chosen those who I value, they add to my life, and I see potential in either me helping them grow or them helping me grow, and most of the time mutually. and them having a willingness for betterment and self-development. There's a lot of people like that in the fitness industry. So I think the people within the industry are great if you find the right ones. Other things I like about the fitness industry, the positive impact that it has on most people's life when they're involved. So physical change can have a massive impact on lifestyle and happiness. And if you just look at the time of recording, the gyms in Scotland have just reopened. People's well-being, their happiness, their levels of serotonin and dopamine are higher than they've been for such a long time because they've got access to exercise and the ability to positively impact their physical shape. So for me, the positive energy from exercise that the fitness industry facilitates is a massive positive. Third, and by no means least, is the fitness industry, and I'm sure some other industries mirror this, has a tremendous amount of online free, supportive, educational content that's immediately accessible on YouTube, on Instagram. Again, have to caveat this, some of the information is shocking and really useless, but overall, fitness seems to have a great plethora of really high level information that you can dive into and you can action it. Question 6, the reverse. 3 things you dislike about the fitness industry. Number 1 has got to be the promotion of quick fixes that completely mislead the general public, who on the whole have a much lower understanding of health and fitness than we sometimes take for granted. I said this before on my episode with Jordan Syatt, who is a really experienced online coach. We actually live in a bit of a bubble. And most people that listen to this will understand things like energy balance and macronutrients and progressive overload within your training. But most of the people that you encounter don't. Just look in your workplace, ask your family, ask some of your friends that aren't really interested in fitness. They are the ones that are likely to fall for the quick fixes like the fat burning pills, the juice diets, the booty blast program that's going to change your life in 4 weeks. It's just not the case. So that's the first thing I really don't like. The other is the over editing of photos by lots and lots of people. I've seen this firsthand. I'm never going to call anyone out on this unless I really get really riled up and I chin this monster and maybe some pre-workout. But there's a lot of over editing. I know people who will not let you post a photo that you're with them in until they've had a play around with it. And they say, oh, we both look better than that. Can you post that? And naively at the time, I was like, okay, that's fine. But yeah, people can be very uncomfortable with posting. And I think, first of all, it's unhealthy for their audience. But secondly, I think from a mental health perspective for that individual, some people can't post without a certain filter on their face or without it going through Adobe Photoshop and tidying up or smoothing edges or sharpening a little bit in your arms or your six pack. That's really, really unhealthy. And I think the fitness industry has an awful lot of that, unfortunately. The last area, and I'll take another sip of the monster, is within fitness. Sometimes we fast track people towards competing in physique-based competitions like bodybuilding shows. And I see a lot of PTs compete firstly to maybe try and grow their business. And I think that's a grave error. I'm sure many of you will have heard people like David Hatt speak on the podcast about how it didn't really help him grow his business at all. And I've got other friends that have done the same, Lewis McFarlane, for example. And the other side of that is PTs almost being like, oh, you've done a cut for your summer holiday, or maybe you've not even managed that, but you kind of get into the gym and they force their clients towards doing shows because that's what they enjoy. And it takes a very certain type of person to go through with a physique show and come out the other end fairly unscathed, or at least in a net positive with the experience they gained in it. And for me, I think too many people go from doing like a fairly base level of fitness to pushing themselves to the absolute extremity of health and fitness, which is physique shows. So I think it can be a bit dangerous, and I don't think that people should automatically need to compete in a bodybuilding show to validate their interest in fitness. I, for one, felt some pressure around that and feeling that, oh, you need to go and do a show call and you train 6 days a week and you track your calories and you get really ripped every summer. You don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise. And I think that's a real negative for the industry. Question 7, and I've heard other people answer this before, and it made me think I've never even considered this. But 3 people at a dinner party, past or present, who would you invite? First things first, it would be remiss of me if I didn't mention this gentleman, and that is my grandpa Willie Thornton, the Rangers legend. And I've heard so many stories. Unfortunately, Grandpa passed away the year before I was born. He passed away in 1991 at the age of just 71. And I've heard so many stories from friends and family, from strangers who were impacted by Grandpa's goal scoring and Grandpa's behaviour as a Rangers player. So for me, I would love to hear stories from his playing days, stories from his management days. And he was also one of the tour guides and the match day hosts at Ibrox. So he has so many stories about the club and who he is. So I would absolutely love the opportunity to pick his brains over dinner. The second of these, I was thinking about somebody from history. So this is another person from the past. I think Winston Churchill would be a tremendously interesting dinner guest because for me, I think he's a real British hero. He managed to pull the country together and guide it forward in a time of real crisis. And if I think you look at the way that the country's dealt with a crisis like coronavirus, would we have benefited from a more Churchillian unifying figure than the current political crop? Then we probably would. And I think the most important part is that Churchill has quite a divisive past. A lot of people nowadays are refreshing and holding him to today's standards. So it'd be interesting to have a conversation with him and understand how to deal with adversity, how to unite people, how to put forward a strategy that moves the country in the best possible direction at that point and defeat what is a truly great evil, the Nazis, and hold off the communists in Russia as well. While, of course, understanding some of his more divisive views that he probably held based on the time period that he was around. And third, I think we need to get somebody who's a bit of an entertainer, and we're going to go for Drake, who's one of my favorite artists. I think he would be an interesting guy to chat to. A lot of his songs are songs that I've listened to over the years in the gym at different periods of my life. I can think about different albums that I listened to of his that had an impact. Although I'm not sure my grandpa or Winston would value his music, I'm sure it'd be an interesting person to have at the dinner table. Okay, question 8. We're going all financial. What investments do you hold personally? Before I dive into this, none of this financial advice. This is absolutely just what I do and what I like to do with my portfolio. So first things first, I have the biggest investment I have is probably my property, which Ian, my younger brother, and I own together. That is a property in Bearsden, which we have a mortgage for. And as part of that investment in the property, we have a large deposit, which we put down. We pay a mortgage, but we also overpay on the mortgage by about £100 a month, which means it's without penalty. And it helps us to beat, in inverted commas, the interest rates on the mortgage over the 35-year term. I can try and explain that on this podcast, but it probably needs somebody a bit more technical than me. But I would advise, if you are looking at buying a property or you're trying to understand about mortgages, there are opportunities to overpay on the mortgage, which will save you thousands, if not tens of thousands of pounds across the mortgage period. So that's the first area of investment. The second area of investment is kind of my bread and butter, which is about 10% of my after-tax salary will go into my Hargreaves Lansdown account, and I split that between two funds. One of them is a global fund, which has exposure to a lot of different assets, and one of them is a British fund, which has exposure to mostly British assets and is actually performing really well at the moment. It's about 10-12% across the few years that I've been investing there. So that's a very passive investment. There's a small amount that I've lumped in over the last 2 or 3 years into some individual stocks and within Hargreaves Lansdown, but their holding as a percentage of what I've invested overall is very, very small. And they were just like off the cuff investments where I had some capital that I like the look of that stock and I'm going to hold it for a little bit. Equally, there's some trading fees around that. I think it's about £11 per purchase or sale on Hargreaves Lansdown. So you need to take that into account when you are buying stocks. Second area for investment within the kind of stocks and shares market is I have a Vanguard account. Vanguard is similar to HL in some ways, but it's a little bit more focused on funds and index funds and ETFs. Again, if I'm using terms that aren't familiar and you're interested in this area, Andrew Craig is on episode 42 of the podcast, and he'd be a good place to start to understand this, as well as his book, How to Own the World. I have around, I think it's between 8 to 10% of my post-tax salary will go into my Vanguard account, and I will invest in a ETF fund which tracks in line with my proposed retirement date, a percentage of assets that are split between equities and bonds. And it's at the lower risk end. Of course, there's always risk in investment, but it's at the lower risk end of investing based on my future retirement date. 100 minus your age is a rule that Andrew Craig has as well. So again, if you're interested in this area of things and look how much risk you should take within your portfolio, then please read his book and understand what you could potentially be investing your money in. And last but not least, we've got a good percentage of my salary invested at the moment, don't we? I invest in cryptocurrency, primarily Bitcoin and a couple of other altcoins. At the time of speaking, we are entering what's called alt season, where I spoke with the gentleman Deck and Don from Crypto Glasgow about what that means for the market. And it's very, very interesting to have an exposure to an asset which is a lot more volatile, but has been extremely fruitful so far. And I primarily use Bitcoin as a form of digital gold as a hedge against inflation, because we are seeing some significant inflation. We're not at hyperinflation yet. God forbid that happens in the UK, but the US particularly continues to print money, and the UK will do so as well, particularly with unemployment, particularly with coming back from COVID. Number 9, a little bit less serious. Hot cross buns, should they be toasted or put in the microwave? Everyone on Instagram knows that I believe they should be microwaved, because I think the toaster, it makes them hard and crispy, which I know can be quite nice if you've got like some hot butter or some cream or some jam or something that you're adding to them. But I prefer mine kind of soft and warm, and I just bite into them like that. There's no kind of need for condiments, and it's a nice taste sensation. Number 10, something you're doing now that you would never have seen yourself doing over 2 years ago. Well, the first that comes to mind is obviously journaling. A lot of people know that I'm coming up for just over a year of journaling now, and it's been a tremendous experience for me overall. It's really helped with my self-awareness, my self-talk, mapping out my intentions for the day, but my intentions over the longer term, and putting pen to paper has been excellent. So I certainly didn't see myself doing that 2 years ago. I didn't see myself podcasting every week. I think I'd only been in 1 and 2 guest appearances by April 2019. So for me, 2 years down the line to be released 67, how many episodes we're on, would have been a big surprise to me. So there's 2 for starters of things that I do. A lot of the other habits I have around training and steps and reducing phone use, a lot of those were in place in 2019. So I've been on that hype for a while. I suppose the only other area of fitness is I didn't see myself doing some of the Metcons and the training that I was doing nowadays. I was a lot more strict in terms of bodybuilding in the logbook, whereas now, yes, there's 3 or 4 sessions like that a week, but there's also some more conditioning sessions where I'm pushing myself aerobically and from a cardio perspective. Number 11, this is somebody that's in the know. When will your news be announced? Eyes emoji. News will be publicly available on the Tuesday, the 4th of May. So depending when you listen to this, you will already know what's changed in my life at that point. Number 12, you haven't spoken a lot about fitness goals. Are you working towards any at the moment? I think the reason I've not spoken an awful lot about them is because I've been on autopilot in many ways. And that's not actually a bad thing, because I feel good about where my fitness is at and what I'm doing. And the habit is so ingrained that I just turn up and do stuff and train hard. And a lot of the time it's progressive. And I'm going to continue to train hard 6 days a week. It might go to 5, depending on what's happening with work and podcast and golf and social life as things open back up. But that's going to look like 3 fairly strict hypertrophy or strength sessions, 3 sessions where I do some of that at the start, and then go into some Metcons, which are more challenging for my cardio and my aerobic. And like I say, I didn't see myself doing that even 2 years ago, but it plays a big part in my training now. Number 13, the biggest thing that COVID has taught you. On a positive side of things, continued appreciation of the small things. So spending a lot of time speaking, connecting with family and friends, and being totally present within that. So being even stricter about when you're with your family or your friends, you're out for a walk or whatever you're up to, having the phone away, date it off if you need to escape the distractions, as I sometimes do, and really valuing the small things in terms of the time. Like, I've always been close with my mum because she stopped working when Ian was born, and so she spent a lot of time with us. But genuinely now I check in with her loads because I know she's been like struggling during the pandemic in terms of like seeing friends and stuff like that. Whereas I guess some of those younger folk have been a little bit more able to see friends and a bit looser. Some of the older generation in their kind of mid-60s have really struggled even more so, especially if you weren't working during it, in terms of like mum is a housewife, and she's found that more challenging. So I think positively, appreciation of the small things and greater presence within the time that you spend with your family and your friends. Negatively, I think a lot of people have lost an element of agency and an element of self-responsibility during the period. And I think one of the ways that was determined was you saw people jump from kind of one cause or virtue signal to the next, instead of assessing what was going on and understanding and kind of changing their minds like the wind would change. Because if you think back to January 2020 in relation to COVID, we had memes like making fun of like coronavirus. You had I don't know if you remember, you had the mask round the bottles of Beck's and then the Corona bottle facing them, and people like laughing because it was only in China at that point. We didn't think it was particularly serious, or well, we thought it was only in China at that point. And then we went all the way through to, this is like the biggest killer, crazy disease we've ever seen that's going to kill millions of people in every country. Like the UK is going to have 20,000 deaths a day or whatever the hysterical figures were. And there's like people jumping from one extreme to the next without ever stepping back and reading the facts and whatnot. And you see people shouting about wearing like 2 masks in America at once, and you just think, can we all just try and be a bit more rational here? So I think from a negative perspective, we've been caught up a little bit in the hysteria, and it's important to try and distance ourselves. And I hate the term do your own research, but because it makes you sound like a conspiracy theorist, but sometimes just step back, review what's publicly available, both in the mainstream media, but also in other sources online, and just make an educated choice in how you feel about things. Question 14, how has socials and podcasting been transferable to other areas of your life? Another tan of the monster there. It's worked in both ways. So I think it's been beneficial. At first, I had a strong writing style for Instagram because of the politics degree that I did. It was heavily essay based, and the skill of taking complex data from political writers in journals or in books and distilling it down into a kind of digestible information within an essay was really valuable. And I just went and did that on Instagram and my socials around fitness in kind of 2017, speaking about big topics like energy balance, cardio, push-pull legs, muscle frequency, protein synthesis, and taking these kind of high-level studies and distilling it down into something that you can understand. So that was definitely like, I suppose, work in education meant that I was primed and ready to transfer that into social media. But then in reverse, talking on stories on Instagram to my camera made me more comfortable within work, presenting over Zoom or presenting over video, which we did a lot of even before the pandemic. And it helped my work with the camera be comfortable both within socials and within work. And I guess I wouldn't have been as comfortable within work if I hadn't done the reps and the practice and awkwardly spoken to the camera on my Instagram story in the past. And equally, that feeds into with the podcast, because I presented since the age of 21 within work, and speaking and presenting and going through PowerPoints and researching your client or your prospect is very similar to what you do in advance of a podcast. You understand about the guest, you understand where you think the conversation might go, you set an agenda, you think about some questions that you might want to ask, you listen intently and let them speak before you come back and think about what they've said and lead the conversation in another direction. And I think that was definitely transferable. So there's definitely transferable skills in both directions. And then lastly, I think my confidence from social media and knowing that people were quite interested in what I had to say was definitely prevalent in my work. As in, I went into work feeling confident that, oh, people quite take to what I've got to say, and I've built a strong personal brand online, so I can do that within the workplace or within whatever marketplace that I'm operating. So it definitely reinforced elements in both directions of what my identity was as a valuable human, and it reassured me on what my values were as well. Following on from that one, question 15. How have you maintained a healthy relationship with socials and podcasting? I think, to be quite honest, at times it's not been healthy. I don't think anyone's relationship with something as complex and as deep as social media can ever be fully healthy, particularly when there is a level of pressure that you put on yourself and maybe your audience puts on you as it grows to show up. And I certainly enjoyed showing up, and I still do. But for 3 years, I posted daily on the Instagram feed on the grid. And that requires a lot of commitment, a lot of time in preparation to try and make it a valuable post as well. And it can be a little bit obsessive, although I was well organized and I tended to have things ready the week in advance in terms of maybe on the Sunday for the most of the week. There were obviously days that came about where I was maybe stressed, and it mostly manifested around being stressed about getting an image to fit a caption. And that would sometimes impact on like situations I was in where I was kind of like, oh, right, I should get my phone out and ask somebody to take a photo for me or ask my friend to take a photo for me. And that ruins the occasion. So I think that would be one of the negatives that I thought about my relationship with socials at that point. However, that was when I was in growth mode, I would describe it as. I was trying to get to 10,000 followers. I was going beyond 10,000 followers. Now, where Instagram is at, I'm fairly happy with the audience size, and that's helped to remove some of the pressures. It's almost that element of discipline short term or medium term equals freedom long term. And I now only really post on the grid 3 to 4 times a week when I feel like it, when I think I've got something to say, maybe when I want to talk about a podcast or share something that's prevalent from one of my deals that I've got with Muscle Food or my protein that might be beneficial to the audience. And I think if we look in contrast at podcasting as part of that, that's seemed pretty healthy right from the start. I haven't felt too much pressure. I did 2 a week the first 10 weeks, so 20 episodes in 10 weeks. And thereafter, it's been weekly, where I've managed to do that quite comfortably. There's been times, and at the moment, that's one of those times where I could definitely do 2 a week for a period because I have a backlog of guests to release, but I want to maintain the quality. I want to maintain a level of life alongside podcasting. And in both instances, Instagram and podcasting, you can get attached to the numbers. And that's why I try not to be too goal focused, and I'd much rather focus on the processes of it. So back in the day, that was 7 grid posts, multiple stories per day, 7 grid posts per week, multiple stories per day. In podcasting, it's 1 per week, record 1 or 2 podcasts per week with an interesting guest, and the results will come. Instagram, interestingly, is not quite as much like that nowadays. And an example would be in recent days, I posted about how to reduce screen time and manage that, which is genuinely an important topic, which would improve most people's quality of life. And it got fairly minimal reach to my followers on Instagram. Whereas in contrast, I posted the day before about gyms in Scotland reopening, me and my top off, like looking happy. And it got triple, maybe 4 times as much reach. So Instagram, in terms of following the process, it doesn't always reward you, and the numbers don't always come from giving value. Sometimes they just come randomly based on what you've posted and what you've shared. Whereas I think podcast has been the opposite. It's just continued to grow as the values continued, and people go back into the archive, which is great, and continue to listen to stuff from over a year ago. 16, biggest cause of friction in your life. I think somebody here has read Atomic Habits, which is good. I think like most people, I spoke there about my relationship with social, I think our relationship with technology is a big area of friction for many of us, and certainly for myself. I can get trapped on an app and think about the time that you spend on a moderately simple task when your phone is present, and how much more it adds to the time that you do, maybe lowers the quality of you doing the task as well. So I would certainly say that that is a noticeable area of friction for me if I don't manage that correctly. Fitnessy one here, 17. If you only had to do 3 exercises for the rest of your life, what are you choosing? Right, for starters, let's work on the foundations, which is legs. So some sort of leg movement that would activate a good portion of my legs. For me, that would either be some sort of squat variation or a dumbbell lunge, which I've always found to be excellent for both quads, hamstrings, glutes. But it'd maybe be like a goblet squat, or a Bulgarian split squat, or a dumbbell stationary lunge. So you're nailing the foundations. That'd be one portion of the exercise. Second would definitely be the pull up or chin up, because it's the king of back movements, and having an aesthetic strong back is both good from a looks perspective, but also from a functional perspective and a feeling good posterior perspective. And the last would be in that line as well, although I was tempted to say bicep curls or tricep extensions. I would say face pull. Given the sedentary sitting lifestyle that many of us lead, and I'm one of those people, I would say that the face pull counteracts the big challenges that we face from sitting for long times, and it works on those rear delts, and it works on that upper mid back, and those kind of smaller muscles, or kind of less focused on muscles that are foundational to us. 18, these are always really hard, these questions. What are your 5-year goals? I am generally pretty terrible at looking too much ahead, and I find processes over goals help me in most cases in terms of that. However, I do need some sort of guiding principle or something to aim at in some way, but I don't necessarily have loads and loads of stuff written down about what 5 years might look like. Equally, my mind may change on that in the future, and I may write down more goals. I have done in the past, but at the moment, a lot of where you end up is based on the actions that you take day to day. And I suppose I would have to reevaluate the actions if in 5, 6, 8 months' time I was looking at myself and saying, "Oh God, I'm not really where I would like to be." So if I was being broad on a career level, I would like to be working in a job that pays me well financially and rewards me, but also fulfills me in terms of getting to speak to exciting clients and prospects that I can understand how I can add value to them by solving a problem or providing a solution, and making sure that in my day job, I'm excited about the opportunity to present and sign and win a deal and help another business or another individual that results in me being financially remunerated. So that's obviously career. But if we think about wider than that, golf, for example, I'd like to play off a lower handicap. I would like to be a mid to high single figure handicap. So between 6 to 9, and being really competitive in that space, playing it in a really nice golf club. I'll pay it a nice one just now, but maybe I would upgrade that in the next few years as my earning power increases. Personal wise, I would hope to be maybe in a settled relationship. I'll be 33 by that point, so maybe I would be more settled than I am now. But equally, I don't think in this day and age you should be in a rush, and I certainly am at the age of 28, but maybe in 5 years I will be. Fitness wise, I would still want to be in pretty ruthless shape and training hard and finding fulfillment from whatever form of training I'm doing. I'm sure hypertrophy and stimulating muscles and being strong and lifting weights will be a part of that, but maybe there'll be other elements that I delve into, like the more functional stuff I've been enjoying. Personal brand and socials wise, I'd want to continue to have a positive influence on whatever platform was in vogue at the time, whether that's Instagram, whether that's podcasting, whether that's YouTube. And I certainly think my focus would be on the ones that enable me to have longer form audio or visual or both conversations, because I think that's where I can add the most value. And I hope you agree. In terms of question 19 is very similar to that. It's actually about my goals for this year, 2021, 2022. And it's very, very similar, but maybe I'd strip it back to, in my career, hitting a certain target that I've got within the business to unlock a particular bonus or incentive. And there's a lot of processes I need, and I know I can follow daily and weekly to do that. But obviously that's a goal that's measured annually. I, fitness wise, would want to continue doing what I'm doing. Probably want to hit a 180 kilo deadlift at about 72, 73 kilos body weight for 1-2 reps, maybe. I'm not really sure. I've not set a bench press target yet, but something like 100 kilos for 5 would be pretty cool. At the moment, I probably do 90 for 6 at a push. So that would be a big jump. I think I can get 2 at 100 just now at about 73, 72 kilos body weight. And the rest of my goals, I think personally, I want to continue to be socially active. I've had some amazing connections during 2020 and 2021, despite COVID. I've seen a lot of people within the environment we've been able to, and I've enjoyed that, and I've connected with some brilliant people. So I'd like that to continue, and that would be a big focus on me to kind of progress in those areas while still being social. Question 20, I'm feeling a bit lost career-wise. I think COVID made this harder for me. What would you do to find the right career path? Right, hard question. First of all, I would ask yourself some questions, and I'm sure the rest of the people listening might value this as well. Question 1, what do you care about? Is it an area that is financially scalable? So you could care about stamps, and that's all well and good, but can you make money, or can you provide value through a service around stamps? Equally, we've spoken to people who've moved from industries into fitness because they thought they could provide value and have a real passion for it. And that's been successful for some, not successful for others. So think about what you care about. Can you add value in it? What kind of money do you want to earn? Because it could well be that in order for you to find a career that you're happy in, it might be one that doesn't make you a millionaire. And that's great. Most people aren't millionaires. Or it could be that you would be willing to work in a job that pays you a lot of money, but you're not quite as excited about or not quite as passionate about. You need to think where your values lie in terms of money versus fulfillment. And you need to work in a sector that will pay you the sort of money in the medium to long term that you want to be on. So if you are absolutely determined to be a millionaire, you probably don't want to work in retail, because I don't know many people that work in retail that are millionaires unless they own the shop or own a chain of shops. So that's just an example off the top of my head. Other questions to be aware of, I think, are what qualifications do you have right now, or where you maybe need to work in the sectors that you're thinking about? So accountancy, insurance, fitness, all these different areas require some form of qualification. Think about what those are, what the timeframes are on getting those, what the cost attached to that is. And I think that's important to understand. Another area for your career path would be think about people that you know, or maybe your friends know, your family know, who work in industries that you're interested in, and set up calls. People are always happy to talk about what they do, normally, as long as they don't hate it. They're normally quite happy. Particularly speak to successful people within the area that you might be interested in. And I'm sure they'll be willing to have a conversation with you, and you can understand more about whether it might be right for you. And they might not sell you a pipe dream. Hopefully they'll give you some good insight. And I think that would be a good space to start. I think the last one is, how willing are you to stick within this career path long term? Can you see yourself doing it in 5 years? I think that's important. I know I'm talking about short-term processes and not being too long-term goal orientated, but are you willing to work within this space for a period of time? Great, then let's go for it. If it's very, very short term, then it's probably not a career path. It's more of a short-term earning decision that you're making. And lastly, I think around that, would you be willing to step to the side, or maybe a small step backwards, if it meant long-term gains within an industry that you think you would have a longer career path in? I think you need to have an understanding or a discussion with yourself about whether you're willing. 21, another kind of businessy career one. Tips for career progression. Again, feel like I'm stagnating because of COVID. Interesting. That's 2 separate people asking about career around COVID. So it's good that people are thinking about that. Career progression wise, I think one of the first things you can do is invest in a mentor. Now, that is not me telling you to go to some online guru, because there are some great ones, but there's some shockers too. But look at people who are 1, 2, 3, 4 steps ahead of you in your career and where you're wanting to go within business, and talk to them. Can I get half an hour of your time? I mentioned that if you're what career path you're looking at. Try and get time with people who are a little bit ahead of you. That can be really informal at first. Find out what their roadmap is. Find out the journey they took. What qualifications did they get? What skills do they think are valuable in your space that you can maybe work on? What are your strengths and weaknesses that differ to theirs or align with theirs, and work on them and know what it will take to move forward. Equally, one of the other areas within career progression, I think a lot of people forget about, and I think I've hopefully done this well during my career, is looking at where you can add value in contrast to your colleagues. So where do you fit within the wider organization, within the business, within the team that you're in, and what can you do that you do better than others, or what can you start to try and do better than others? Example for me in sales would be, am I better at cold calling? Am I better at writing emails? Am I better at presenting in meetings? These are all things where you can add value that your colleagues can't. Recently, I've started doing videos in the last wee while to send to prospective clients, and a lot of my colleagues were a bit shy of doing that. And I mentioned earlier that one of the reasons I feel quite confident is because I've done that on Instagram over the years, and I feel confident speaking to whoever it is on a video and recording myself, which is really uncomfortable for a lot of people, but it makes me more valuable within my career, and it helps me progress, because within the organization, they're like, well, that's really innovative and clever what Colin's doing there, and look at the results he's getting from it. And that should be something that you look at as well. What do you do quite well that some of your colleagues are like, oh God, I don't really like that, or they're not very good at it? Equally, if there's things that nobody in your team is good at and you're not good at them yet, why don't you try and get better at it? Because then you solve a problem for the organization. And if you solve a problem for the organization, you probably generate some revenue for it, and you should be remunerated based on that. So that's a couple of tips, I think, for career progression. Question 22, 3 people you'd most like to have on the podcast. As I said when I was talking about my dream guest, this changes all the time just based on who I've had on and some great guests. The previous top 3 were obviously James Clear, Joe Delaney, and I've had a mind blank. Who was the other one I wanted on? Andrew Craig, of course, Andrew Craig. And for me, it remains James Clear would be my top 3 guests I've not had on yet. And Jamie Alderton, I think, would be an interesting guest. So he was well known as Grenade J. He was somebody that had a lot of influence on me in the fitness space, but also regarding mindset. His book, Mindset with Muscle, when I was 2016, it would have been, had a profound effect on me. So I'd love to have a chat with Jamie. If anyone knows him, please introduce me. And the last one would be another financial one. Ramit Sethi, I've read his book, I Will Teach You to Be Rich. And he's a very interesting guy in the financial space. Little bit of a guru, but he has the means and the processes to back it up, and I think he would be a great guest. And actually, previous podcast guest Chris Burns sent me his book to read during the first lockdown last year, and it was a great book to read. Number 23, your influences, inspirations, admirations, and heroes. Go. I had a wee chat with the gentleman that sent this question in, and I'm going to try and go into this in as much depth as possible. Many of you will have heard me answer it on maybe the first solo podcast back, maybe episode 44, 45, something like that. And I spoke about those that motivate me. One of those was my grandpa, Willie Thornton, who would be a dinner guest for me. My own dad and his work ethic. People like Jamie Alderton, who inspire me. Joe Delaney, who inspires me with his physique. However, I think if we're talking foundationally, your family motivate you and they motivate me because you spend so much time with them, and particularly during your formative years. So throughout the course of my life, my family, my parents have had a massive effect on me. However much you dislike that, they definitely shape you, your parents. Equally, I'm definitely influenced by my brother. We spend a lot of time together. We've had so many similar interests over the years. The gym, rugby, golf. Socially, we've always been in similar circles as well. Football. moving forward, we both did same type of degree at university. We both did politics, albeit at different universities, and we currently work in the same career sector in insurance. So there's a lot of crossover. So inevitably, you're influenced by people you spend time with. Inspirations and admirations wise, I've definitely said my family. So my dad and my grandpa Willie Thornton are big inspirations, and the people I admire heavily, mostly due to work ethic and the achievements that they had during their life, particularly grandpa as somebody that's been at the top of the football world and is well respected there. And he won a military medal as well, which I'm very proud of. But beyond that, I think I was physically inspired by people like Joe Delaney, by Jamie Alderton, by Johnny Starr, if any of you know who that is. He's an Australian guy, absolutely incredible physique. He's definitely not natural, but you can still appreciate the standard physique that he's built, and that inspires you. And then if we're talking about admirations externally, previous guest in the podcast, Chris Williamson, somebody I have tremendous admiration for. Look what he's built with Modern Wisdom, but also look at the journey he's been on with self-actualization and understanding of who he is, and the development of his personality post reality TV and being a club promoter for such a long period of time, to now be a voice of self-development and guidance to so many young men and women must be incredible. And I've got a lot of admiration for him from that perspective. So a follow-up to this question for 24 was, how has that changed over time? So what was it years ago, and are there any constants that remain during this period, or are there any quick fixes that you have to get you up and get you going? I think the phrase that the gentleman that asked me this question was like, what gets Colin going when he needs something quick? Family, first of all, are an absolute constant, as there's not been many changes in that area for me during my lifetime. I was raised by my two parents and lived with my brother. We're a very small family. We never really had any grandparents that were alive during that time. So there's not been any massive shifts or changes in that. And I'm fortunate that both my parents are still healthy and with us and supporting us. Ones that evolve, that are not constants, will be the sources that I consume. So there's absolutely times where I've relied more on motivation or getting fired up by a particular source. So I remember when I first started trying to really train my legs hard, after people had said, oh, you've got good arms and abs, but you know legs, I would watch like YouTube videos like leg day motivation or leg day montage or squats to failure videos before I went and trained my legs. Whereas now I would never need that. Like, I'm quite happy to go and train my legs hard because that's just what I do. So I think the sources you consume over time definitely change, and you definitely start to rely on different things. I also think certain books resonate harder with you depending on what you're going through in your life at some point. So I read Atomic Habits twice. Both times it's been massive, but the second time I read it, it just reinforced that the habits and the behaviors that I have are massively positive for where I want to end up. Whereas at that time in life, I was kind of questioning, like, am I too focused on my habits or too focused on what I do daily? Quick fix is an interesting one, because I think you always need some sort of trigger sometimes to get you going on those days where you're not absolutely flying, and nobody's flying all the time. And I'm certainly not by any means, although I think my level now is fairly high. So sparking a monster 40, 45 an hour before I train is a big way for me to flip the switch, and as a quick fix to think, right, Colin, it's go time. Let's get to work. Another that may interest people is my steps. Many people know that I go for my morning steps, and that's like a start to the day. That is the time to go, Colin. Let's proceed with a positive day. But I actually, interestingly, also use steps as a quick fix of thinking about problems and challenges, particularly without any input from a podcast or music or headphones on a phone call. I think going for a walk can lead to you thinking a lot more clearly. And I'm sure there's some science around it. And I'm actually looking at a particular podcast guest, and we'll see if I've got the leverage to get him on. So please keep sharing the episodes to help get the listens up, because to get some of the guests I'm going for now, you need some clout. But off tangent there. In order to refresh or think, lunchtime is a prime example. Away from my laptop for 30, 40 minutes, getting some movement, getting some steps in. A lot of the time I will be listening to a podcast, but sometimes I'll just have no input at all, and it'll enable me to reset in a quick fix to have a really good, strong afternoon at work. And I do believe that movement facilitates clarity of thought. So that'll be an interesting one for people to think of as a quick fix to reset your day and move forward. 26. What is your biggest frustration with the podcast? Do you know, I'd never thought about this until somebody asked. I don't think I've had massive frustrations with it over the last year. Probably the only one would be, and this is being maybe a bit sour, but if I have a guest on and they don't share it as much as I would hope with their audience, whether that's not posting it on their grid or not posting it in their story or not resharing some of the tags that they get, I think that's disappointing sometimes, because you would hope that they would put it out there. But again, I can't be too fussy about that. It's their personal choice whether they want to really push the episode that they've been involved in. I know from personal experience, I've been on a lot of podcasts now, and I'm always happy to reshare it and try and get that podcast some exposure or share the conversation that I've had, because I hope it'll be valuable to my audience, because I know you listen to me on this solo one, so hopefully you go and listen to me being interviewed on another. 27. What protein do you get from My Protein? For shakes, I always get Chocolate Smooth Impact Whey Protein. It is an absolute winner, just does the job so well, just tastes great. You can include your greens powder in that and you don't even taste it as much. That's good notes as well, but maybe even better notes is Cinnamon Danish, which is amazing for oats and for yogurt as well. Obviously, if you're ordering from My Protein, MP Call is the way to go to get your discount as well. 28, nearing the home straight now. Can you think of any defining moments in your life that you feel shaped you into who you are or made you realize who you wanted to be? Hardest question of the episode, I think. In fact, I know that's the hardest question of the episode. I mentioned earlier about like 17-year-old calls plans. I think whoever and whatever you've experienced over a period of time builds and shapes you. So everything that's happened from my cradle all the way up to this point has had an influence and shaped me in who I want to be and who I wanted. So it's hard to think of exact moments that are like massive and foundational and kind of key in my development or changing who I am. However, if you're thinking like childhood experiences, I definitely know that I lift weights and want to feel physically strong and well presented, because as a child at late primary school, early secondary school, I wasn't particularly impressively built. I was quite small and slight. I was easily pushed around and disregarded. I didn't feel particularly respected. So that certainly has defined me, because it's meant that I've had an aversion to being like that. And that's not to say I've got small man syndrome or I'm self-conscious about not being big, because I'm 5'10", I'm well built, and I look well presented, and some of the people that I maybe would have not got on well with at school that I don't think treated me with respect, like I would laugh at them now. But that's been a conscious effort, because I suppose I wouldn't ever want to end up in that position again where somebody thought they could physically impose themselves on me. And that's not to say I've had a really, really tough time at school. I definitely wasn't terrible, but I wasn't like a high status individual in early secondary school, because I felt quite slight and meager, and I definitely wasn't an imposing figure. So that would definitely have defined me to some extent. Other moments I think have led to where I am just now. I was a podcast guest probably 2 to 3 times in early 2019. I've said maybe before that made me want to host my own podcast, which I think is healthy and has led to me going all in on this. So those are defining moments that compounded. So I don't think it was one particular episode where I was like, I'm going to do this myself. But those added up and became a reason that I wanted to be a guest, and it lit my fire that I thought I can be a positive influence on this platform. Why don't I do it? Equally, other defining moments, again, I think these compound, but some of the messages you get back in the day when I was first starting with Instagram, Ian and I were doing Cambros together. Some of the messages the impact you were having just from giving free value, like people saying like, I've lost weight because I've been following your page and I understand macros all of a sudden. You explain it so well. That felt amazing. And that kind of defines your ability to continue and do that. And equally, podcast has been incredible for that. Like far more messages about the podcast than I do about Instagram now. And it keeps you going, and it defines what you want to try and deliver on the platform. Last question, and hopefully trying to get me all emotional here. Did you cry when Rangers won 55? I did. Um, no tears from me. Actually, at the time when we officially won the league, I was training at the garage gym with Ian and Fraser, who owns the garage, and we started to stream the Dundee United Celtic game because we'd won the day before against St Mirren, and Celtic had to win to stop us winning the league. And it was 0-0 with about 5 minutes to go, and Ian got a stream on his phone, and I just didn't want to watch it because I thought, oh, Celtic will score and then we'll need to win it. I think it was the week after that. But we streamed it. It was 0-0. Final whistle blew. Obviously, we're jumping around celebrating. So there wasn't any tears or anything like that, but genuinely celebrating that day, seeing the players at the training ground, seeing friends and celebrating with them, that was incredible. And I was on a massive high for weeks after that, but no tears. I kind of had that. I wasn't drinking, as many of you know, I'm not a big drinker at all, but I had that kind of drunk, husky voice for like a few days afterwards. I actually jumped in a few different podcasts as a guest. And I think I had one that I recorded for my show where I was apologizing to the guest because I was a lot more husky and hoarse because I've been shouting and singing and celebrating. But no tears. I think Trophy Day on the 15th of May, I believe it is, which is coming up, I'll definitely be emotional, but I'm not sure I'll cry. Rangers means a tremendous amount to me because of my family, because of my heritage and my passion for it, but didn't elicit any tears at that point. So that's us wrapped up, and another solo podcast, another Q&A with 29 questions answered. Hopefully you've enjoyed all of those. If you've got any really good ones, save them for the next time round. I'll hopefully do this in about 10 episodes time, and you'll enjoy that equally. As ever, please continue to support the podcast. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, hit the 5-star review button and leave a short written review about what you're enjoying about it. Or even better than that, share it direct with a friend that you think would enjoy it. And I'll be back to speak to you all again very, very soon.